Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Joshua Mawani, a student researcher, part of the Smartin research team. This panel is on mental health literacy across the institution, and I'll now hand you over to Julia Haas, who will be chairing this panel.
Good morning, everyone. It's so nice to have you here, whether you're in Australia or here in the UK. The sun's shining, which is fantastic. Happy for that, counting down the days till the holiday break here. But I'm Julia Haas. I am not Natasha Devon, if that's what you were expecting. Quick change of pace here. I'm going to be the moderator today and chairing this session. I'm really happy to be here with you all. I am the Student Wellbeing and Welfare Manager at King's College London in the Students' Union, and I'm really interested in mental health literacy because my real passion and interest is in peer support. And we know that students turn to each other informally to talk about difficulties and to get support from each other. And so mental health literacy is a real way to upskill students and to train them to formalize those peer support structures and really have the opportunity to grow them and build communities of good well-being where students have the skills and literacy to support each other and create a community of good well-being. So that's what I'm really excited to be here for. Mental health literacy is such an interesting area, and it's great to have you all here. So I'll tell you a little bit about how this session is going to run first and foremost, and then I'll kind of run through some kind of housekeeping things. I mean, housekeeping seems weird in a virtual space, but we'll go through that. And then we'll hand over to our panelists and have them introduce themselves. So the way that the session is going to be run is that each of our panelists will have 2-minute speeches and in answering a question to introduce themselves. And then we will have an open panel discussion where you will be able to ask your questions. And then we'll have a Q&A from webinar attendees, and there'll be social media viewers as well. There will be a non-recorded session after this session is done at 11 a.m. And this is a chance to go into breakout rooms and have really open discussions with speakers and each other and learn from each other and have kind of an informal networking space. And so please do stick around for that. It's a really helpful way to connect with each other. I really do miss the Smartin conference last year where I remember us having coffee, tea, and connecting with each other. There was a real buzz in this space in that morning, and we do kind of miss that. So do stick around for the breakout rooms to connect with each other afterwards. So what can be really helpful is when you're asking questions in the Q&A is just to introduce yourself and say who you are before you ask the question, just so that we can share that and learn from who's kind of in the space. And if any of the content that we go through is distressing for you, if you find it difficult, we do have a mental health first aider, Laura Beswick. And so you can send a private message to Laura if you'd like to have a chat or feel like something is distressing for you. We also have some support services that we can signpost to, and they'll be in the chat for you if you're feeling distressed at all. So there are some pre-recorded interviews of the panelists, and there's some points of things that they'll be going through, as well as papers that they might be highlighting. So if they kind of are saying anything in their introductions, you'll be able to find more information on them there on the Smartin Network website. And you should have got this in your link with the Zoom anyways. So also today we're going to be using Twitter lots. So the Twitter hashtag is #SmartinConf. So if you want to say anything or ask questions, definitely tweet us and add that hashtag so we can share that. So yep, just a second reminder that this session is being recorded and it will be made available to watch again on the Mental Health YouTube page and also on the Smartin website. So what would be really helpful just to start this session is to kind of understand who's in this space. So we're going to share a poll now, and there will be a few polls throughout, so please do participate in them. It's great to have a little introduction to who we are. So the question is, what's your primary role in relation to student mental health? You can submit it there, and we'll see kind of who's in the space here. All Great, cool. So we have 25%, our students, amazing. It's great to have you all here. Having your voices in this space is so important, and we're really, really pleased to have you here. I love working with students, do every day, and I'm really got to give a shout out to some of my positive peers who are here, sidebar. We have 32% of you are researchers, great to have you. 7% are clinicians, 11% are teachers or lecturers, and 25% are a mysterious other, which I'd love to know more about. But it's really great to have you all here, and it's great to have such a spread of backgrounds here as well in this space. And I'm really looking forward to hearing questions from you all, because everyone's coming from such different perspectives, which is so helpful in this kind of space. Okay, cool. So now we're going to get started with introducing our panelists as well. And so we're going to start with introducing Tony. So Tony, I'm going to ask you a question, and then it'd be great to hear kind of a bit about who you are in response to your question. So Tony, it was originally you who invented the term mental health literacy. It's really great to have you here. Back in the 1990s. Can you give us a bit of a summary about how that term came about?
Well, no, can you hear me okay? I was having a bit of speaker trouble earlier. Okay?
Yeah, it's okay. I think if you lean a little closer to the speaker, that would be better.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it used to be years ago, it used to be thought if we wanted to solve the problem of mental health problems in society, we needed to have professionals who knew what to do. So originally that was people like psychiatrists and clinical psychologists. And in the 1990s in Australia, people thought, oh, we've got to spread it to GPs. And I thought at the time, that's not enough. You know, when you look at the prevalence of mental health problems in society, in Australia, the figure we give is one in 5 adults a year affected. I think in the UK, you get 1 in 4. And so that means like all of us are either going to be affected ourselves, or somebody close to us is going to be affected. So I thought, it needs to be whole of community. Everybody needs to know what they can do for prevention, what they can do for self-help, what they can do to assist others. So together with some colleagues, we thought, well, how can we draw attention to this? So we made up this buzzword, mental health literacy. There's nothing profound in it. It's simply a term to draw attention to a neglected area. We didn't really think it would catch on particularly beyond academic areas, but in Australia it did. It's in very widespread use, and it has gone to other countries as well, not quite as much, and it's been in national policy documents and so on. So all of that is very gratifying, but I must say I've been sort of rather disappointed in what's happened with the term mental health literacy, because when we defined it, we said it's about knowledge and skills that you use to benefit your own mental health or those of others. It's not knowledge and skills about abnormal psychology or the genetics of schizophrenia. That's all useless to people. It's practical knowledge and skills. So more recently, I proposed that we should replace mental health literacy, and we should replace it with the term mental health action. Mental health action is action that you can take, we can take, or communities can take to help their own mental health or the mental health of others. So the original idea was you had knowledge and skills, which led to action, which led to improved mental health. But people just talked about the knowledge and skills, not about the actions. But now I want to say, let's talk about mental health action, what we can do to change things practically to benefit our own mental health and those of other people. Would you like me to keep talking?
No, that's great. Thanks, Tony. I love that. I use the term mental health. You're like, I've got more to say. I love it. Let's hear more from you a little bit later on. I use the term mental health literacy so much in thinking about sharing knowledge, and that by having knowledge, you'll change your actions. But I really like that kind of change in thinking about, actually, this is action orientated. But the idea is to have the knowledge to do something differently with it, right? So I think that that's really interesting. And really,
but it's putting emphasis on what you do, not what you know.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. I'm really excited to hear more about that. Thanks so much, Tony, for being here. It's great to have you here. Just as a note, don't forget to post your comments and questions in the chat window, or using the hashtag SmartandConf hashtag on social media as well, just as a shout out for that. Great. Thanks so much, Tony, for being here. We're going to move on to Kath. So Kath, moving kind of across to the UK perspective, to what extent do you think students need to be skilled up to manage their mental health as they make the transition to university? Kath,
I'll try that again without being muted.
Great, I can hear you. I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, the transition from school to university is a massive one, because not only is it a great big jump in academic standards and expectations, But to suddenly go from a very comfortable, supported, for most students, I appreciate not all, to go from a comfortable and supported environment to a place where you are meeting new people every day, you're forming new friendships, you're learning new skills, even, I mean, I hate to use the term adulting, but even just about learning how to budget and learning how to cook and look after yourself. These are all incredibly difficult for a lot of students, and they don't take it into account particularly. I've got a lot of experience from working with the student population. I was a student counsellor at Liverpool University for a long time, and I found that they would come with these huge expectations of often party lifestyle or academic lifestyle, or if they had mental health problems at home, it would all be different when they came to university. And of course it isn't, it's just harder. People who come to university with mental health problems will still have them, but they won't have the support networks, they won't have people feeding them, they won't have people getting them up and making sure they go where they need to be. So it's a massive step up, and the guide that I've written was kind of to wake people up to that, really. It's not going to be easy. It can be fun. There's a lot of great things that you get to do, you know, take a shower when you want, eat what you want. There's a lot of advantages to being a student, but it's not as easy as people think it is. So balancing your life with actually the new academic demands can have a massive impact on people's mental health. So that's kind of where I come from.
Yeah, it sure can. I have loads of students saying to me when they start university, I was told this was supposed to be the best years of my life. This is really hard. And it's just like, I think there's got to be something that we do to like change the myth that it's always great, right? There's going to be challenges. Yeah. That is life, right? And so I think it's really interesting to think about that transition. So we have another poll actually for you guys. So do you think all students should receive compulsory training in spotting the signs of mental ill health in their peers? This is a yes, no, or not sure question. So just thinking about when they come to university, should there be some basic training for students to be able to kind of know about mental health and what maybe they should be getting help for? What do you think about that? Compulsory, I suppose, is the tricky part of that question, but let's hear what you guys think. All right, so we've said 73% have said yes, 7% have said no, and then 19% have said not sure. I suppose the compulsory nature of it always makes it a bit tricky for basically any sort of training you do for students. But I suppose that we can all agree that there is some sort of basic upskilling that we should be doing with students when it comes to actually, you know, changing the language and the discussion around mental health. When I talk to students, I'm like, you breathing? Yep. Okay, you have mental health. We all have mental health. How do we talk about that? How do we support each other? So I think there is something to potentially thinking about training as compulsory nature. So now we're going to be moving on to Denise. So Denise, your research focuses on the role of emotions in learning. Are there things that students can do to manage their emotions to boost their learning potential?
Hi, yeah, I think it's really interesting. That poll's really interesting. I answered unsure because what I'm all about is actually what I think should be compulsory isn't knowing about diagnoses and signs and symptoms in that medicalized language. It's actually psychological literacy for helping people to understand how their emotions work and how their emotions are really central to their learning. And as Kath has just said, there's so much impact on people of the challenges that they're facing, not just the challenges of learning. So I think, you know, mental health literacy campaigning has achieved such a huge amount. It has been really important to have people understand more about mental health. And what Tony was saying, you know, I think, you know, what he's done and all the campaigns that have followed since. And, you know, I was involved with co-creating with students, the Students Against Depression website in the early 2000s and around at the start of Student Minds and so on, bringing students, having students know more about mental health, having them be equipped to support each other and peer support, that both of those things have been just so important. And I think, that we're in such a different place now compared with sort of the 90s, early 2000s, when there was that activist campaigning was so important. Now we've got the Universities UK, whole institution approach, step change, frameworks, the University Mental Health Charter, this recognition at the highest level of how important student mental health is. And that's fantastic. And I think the next step is to widen it out to sort of psychological literacy as part of learning, as an educational skill, and to sort of step beyond and wider than the medicalized, deficit-focused language, which it can get kind of stuck in. I think it's such powerful language, but it also can become a bit of a dead end. And so, that's what I'm working on, and we've been working sort of thinking about how learning itself involves needing to be able to tolerate the discomfort of not knowing, of being unfamiliar with something, in order to sort of cross over to that transformational understanding of new concepts and more difficult things. And of course, coping with things, being unfamiliar, not having things around you that have supported you before is, as Kath pointed out, part of the student experience for many students. So how to have language and a way of understanding what's going on for you that helps you see those challenges as part of life, as part of learning, and to be equipped to then think about how you how you can not just support yourself, but be supported, and sort of thinking about support as something which is, not based on deficit, not only for those who need it, but what we all need for life and for managing the challenges of life and the challenges of learning. That's what our emotion regulation for learning model tries to teach. Please do watch the little animation that we've used, which adapts Paul Gilbert's compassionate mind model to the student experience and to learning. And the idea is not just that you are learning how to sort of manage your own emotions and deal with your own threat response and have self-compassion. It's also about compassion for others. So in being there for other people, you're also contributing to that sense of being in part of a network of supportive connections, and you're helping to build that kind of really important sense of belonging and inclusion that's essential. And it's looking at that and an institution's role in creating that as the basis for successful learning, which is what I'm working on at the moment. And yeah, be very interested to hear from people who are interested in that, and please do watch the animation, and I'm happy to chat further.
Thanks, Denise. And the animation would be on the Smarten website along with your bio, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great, cool. Yeah, so do check out that animation. And I love what you said about we want to be part of communities where we feel kind of equipped to support ourselves, but also support others, right? Like that's the kind of place I want to be at. And so I love what you're saying about there's some literacy involved with that, but I suppose there's some empowering as well. Definitely. Thank you so much, Denise. It's great to have you here. Moving on to Kate. Kate, your research overlaps with Denise's in thinking about the role of emotion in learning. And you also look closely at staff. What role do you think staff play in helping students manage their emotions? And how can staff actually show that they really do care?
Yeah, hi, I'm Katie Ippolito, a PhD student at Imperial College. I've recently interviewed 18 university teachers about their awareness and agency for working with emotions, so I'll draw on their responses. So first, I think it's about them recognising the centrality of emotion in learning. In the words of Mary Helen Imodinho-Yang, in the last 2 decades, we've gone from thinking that emotions interfere with learning to understanding that it's neurologically impossible to engage in complex thoughts and make meaningful decisions without emotion. I think there's also a role in them anticipating at the design stage that emotions that content and teaching approaches are likely to provoke, and critically reflecting on how desirable these are. So this might avoid designing out some of the perceived negative emotions, such as confusion and unhelpful stress, which can actually be really important for stimulating cognition. I think there's a role for university teachers to explain to students at the outset the potential for discomfort and negative emotions. The teachers I'm talking to really want to teach their students how to manage uncertainty, and they describe how the learning experiences designed to achieve this can cause uncertainty and anxiety for them as teachers, but also a lot of satisfaction and pride for everyone when the task is complete. I think taking into account Reinhard Pekran's control value theory, which I find really helpful, this emphasises the role of an individual's appraisals of a situation on their emotion. So I think there's a role for teaching staff to help students appreciate the value, the relevancy, even the enjoyment of what they're learning, and to carefully balance the level of control. So in a teaching context, control might relate to the degree of independence, learner choice, the clarity of the task, learners' perceived preparedness for the task, all of which can cause anxiety if there's too much control or too little control. I think it's about staff creating safe spaces for students to talk about their emotions related to learning, and also sharing their own emotions. A lot of staff talked about their keenness recently to talk about their own emotion and to model how they manage that. So that's related to what Denise said there about managing your own emotions. I think it's also important that staff are able and confident to hold the tension as students progress through a range of emotions, and not try to, design learning that makes students happy or satisfied all the time. It's also about being aware of the relationship between the emotion in learning and also students' mental well-being more generally. And I'd say all of these actions, to use Tony's word, relate to teachers and students becoming more emotionally literate in the context of their discipline. I think staff show that they care when they listen to students, when they show an interest in the reasons they chose to come to university, and they remember the next time they speak to those students about what that student said. I think it shows they care when they don't feel afraid to ask how a student is, to say, I noticed you were quiet today, or I noticed you look more tired than usual. And kind of give the student that space to talk about their well-being. Students say that they really appreciate staff noticing and listening and commenting and asking how they are, because I think sometimes students think that teaching staff won't be interested or won't have time for that, but my interviews suggest that staff are really interested in how students feel and supporting their well-being. I think that's probably what I wanted to say.
Great. Thank you so much, Kate. So we've kind of heard a lot about mental health literacy in general, and then different perspectives from training students and talking about emotions. And so we're going to do another poll to talk about kind of, if you could choose only one of these for your university, which would you? So these are different ones for improving mental health literacy in staff or in students. So which one of these would you choose as your top? So we're going to do another poll. So we have kind of peer support, so training students to support each other, mental health first aid for students, so getting some basic literacy around mental health difficulties, the same for staff, emotional intelligence workshops for staff, or managing negative emotions workshops for students. So which would you choose as your sort of main one that you'd want to have at your university? We'll let you choose here and we'll see what you guys think. I think all of them have a place in different ways, but let's see what you guys are thinking. Okay, wow, it's really split here. Okay, so we have 24% peer support, and that can be really embedded in your communities, totally get that. And mental health first aid for students is 14%, just a tiny bit higher for staff potentially. Emotional intelligence workshops for staff, 14%, and managing negative emotion workshops for students. So that is the highest one at 33%. And so I guess there's probably a place for lots of these in university, right? In different times of the student journey. And for staff as well, I think it's a little bit of everything would be the dream, right? But I suppose it's always focusing on where you begin. So thank you so much for the panel, for introducing yourself. It's great to kind of hear a little bit of backgrounds of your research interests. And so we're going to kick off with one question that we had prepared, and then we'll start moving into questions that you guys have for the panel. So there's a lot of emphasis on resilience these days. It tends to be a bit of a buzzword. Some people love it, some people hate it. It's a real kind of Marmite word for some reason in higher education, student mental health. And so I guess I'm just wanting to ask the panel, do you think, like, how helpful do you think the word resilience is? I don't know if any of you have like a particular, does anyone want to share from the panel? Yeah, we'll go with Kate. Kate, can you?
I think it was Denise that had her hand.
Oh, sorry. Great, Denise, sorry. I like that actually. Go ahead.
I think that it's probably clear from what I said about my approach that focusing on individuals, what I know students hate about the resilience word, and what I don't like about it, is that it's as if when a student is struggling, finding things difficult, it's somehow a deficit in them, that they've not got enough resilience. And I think, you know, when it's used like that, it's completely unacceptable. And you know, the approach that I'm taking is that resilience is created through the community, and it's a responsibility of the institution and the teaching staff to create the framework for the support for a resilient approach to learning, which is, you know, so it's about, so yes, absolutely, we need students to be equipped to manage challenges. And you know, what Kate was saying about it being so important that teaching isn't kind of sanitized in some way to be less challenging. I mean, ultimately that's impossible. You can't learn without being challenged, as I've said. But it's not about individuals somehow having it or not having it. It's about how you go about scaffolding and supporting and creating the environment for good learning. And that's the responsibility of the you know, everybody co-creating together a good environment, and making sure people are being properly supported throughout. So you know, I think it has become a sort of toxified word, and it is an important word. I think people do need to expect to deal with challenges and for things to be challenging. And, you know, so a word for that is resilience, but seeing it as a sort of individual quality that someone kind of is in some way, you know, lesser if they have less of it, is, you know, that's definitely something I don't like the idea of, and I think some of the language does do that.
Absolutely, thanks, Denise. So what does the audience think? Do you guys think that the term resilience is a helpful word in education? Should we be doing like resilience workshops? Should that be the title of them? This is just a simple yes, no. What do you guys think about the term resilience? It'd be great to hear from you. We're going to do another poll, I think. Andre, do we have another poll?
It looks like Andre's just popped away. I think if we
That's fine. I think I'm getting a real mix in the chat. Ah, here we are. Surprise, it's here. So no is saying 66%, doesn't think it's super helpful, 34% do. Yeah, I think it is quite split. I'm tending to stray away from the word myself in my work, but I think what it is useful. for students. Maybe if the word is so divisive, maybe I'll stray away from that personally, but thanks so much for sharing. So we're going to open up to you guys to ask the questions of this amazing panel. So if you're in the webinar, you can post your questions in the chat window, and everyone else in the webinar will be able to see them. You can comment on them if you select everyone in the meeting when you post. Otherwise, you can use the hashtag #SmartandConf for any questions as well on Twitter. So we're going to start with thinking about kind of diverse understanding. So questions come in from Nicola Kogan, and I think I'll ask Tony this question. So how do we embrace diverse understandings of mental health and mental health literacy across diverse cultural reference points? And thanks to Nicola Kogan for that question. Tony, what do you think about this kind of diverse understanding with lots of different diverse cultural settings?
I think there's definitely a cultural element to mental health literacy. Like different cultures differ in their vocabulary for describing mental health problems. Like, you know, in Australia, people use the term depression more or less in a psychiatric sense. It's just everyday use. People use terms like PTSD and OCD, everyday use. But I know I work with a student from Sri Lanka. She said in Sinhala, in their language, there is no word for depression. There's a technical term that professionals know, but there's no lay term. So that's just a very basic example of a major cultural difference. So the way that you would communicate distress could be quite different in different cultures in that way. You know, another major way I think it manifests is, you know, the role of family. You know, in many countries are very individualistic, and the autonomy of a person is something we respect. But I know in other cultures, what your family thinks is very important, and they can do things that other cultures might think are quite intrusive and so on. So I think the whole thing needs to be conceptualized. It's all a matter of thinking, yeah, what can be done within that cultural framework that benefits people's mental health, or the mental health of the people they interact with. And I think there are some universals. Like, I think being kind and understanding and listening to people with mental health problems is probably a universal, but I think there are probably other aspects, like the language you use to describe, communicate distress and so on, and various social roles that are acceptable that are culture bound as well. So it's a combination.
And do you kind of feel like, I guess, listening is probably an important piece in understanding someone's cultural framework?
I think they're universals. I mean, I've done some research on like mental health first aid skills, and we've got expert consensus from professionals and people with lived experience across different cultures. And there are some things that seem to be universal. And, you know, being kind, listening, not being critical, I think they're universals for humans, but there are other aspects that are quite culturally specific as well. So I think it is possible to come up with some things that would apply across us as humans, as a species. But yeah, there has to be this local adaptation element as well.
Definitely. Thanks, Tony. And in training that I do with students, when I'm talking about empathy and how you can listen to another student and their experience with empathy, I always say focus on the feelings, because those are what we share as humans, right? You don't have to have an experience with a specific type of mental health difficulty, but you know what sadness feels like. You know, you know what those things feel like. And so I think that that's really important, is that sort of universal language of feelings that we all share, right?
But it's interesting you use that word empathy. That word empathy was created by Kitchener, a psychologist, about a century ago. It didn't exist in the English language before then. So it's very interesting, and it's gone in from a psychological, technical use to everyday use. So these concepts and the way we communicate about it, you know, it's particular to a language, to a culture.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Tony. I'm going to move on to a question for Kath. I think this would be a good question for Kath. So this is moving on sort of from the language to sort of the age, I guess. So the question is from Jonathan. Thank you. So what about the mental health literacy of students who are not 18, who are making difficult transitions into university at a different time in their life? So what about the mental health literacy of students who are not even 18 yet, and it's a big transition coming into university? What do we think about that, Kath? I think you're on mute, Kath.
just so you don't hear my dog barking in the background, really. I think we forget that it's not just 18-year-olds going to university. There is a whole range, both from younger students, but also a lot of mature students who are entering into university at very different stages of their life, and who have other demands on their time and other home demands. They might have children, they might have changed career, and they might just be in a very different stage of life. But the thing that is the same is encouraging people to have a real self-awareness of what is going on for them, and to recognise when they need to take action to support themselves. And self-awareness for me is the key to that, because I think a lot of the time we just soldier on, we just keep going without really checking in, and then we can burn out. But if you get into the habit of regularly thinking, okay, so what is going on for me today? And this is whatever age you're at. Am I feeling anxious? Am I feeling sad? And what can I do about it? And sometimes that can just be taking time out. Sometimes it can be making sure you're doing all the basics, you know, sleeping well, eating well, keeping hydrated, having a social life, which, you know, in these times is difficult, and, you know, exercise. All of those things are valuable for people of all ages. So I think self-awareness is the key, whatever age you're at transitioning, really.
Absolutely. So self-awareness is an important part of students really being able to actually know what they need to do for themselves, right? At any age. Absolutely. Yeah. I definitely agree with that. It's a tricky thing to teach, but I think it can really come through learning from your peers as well. So the next question is kind of around, I think, peer support in a lot of ways. So I think I'll ask this question to Denise. Do the panelists have any suggestions for helping peers to help incoming students learn about imposter phenomenon and how that can make transition and belonging difficult? This is a question from Claire Battle. So yeah, any suggestions for helping students with incoming students with imposter phenomenon?
Thank you so much for asking me that question. We've got, so part of the building on the emotion regulation for learning approach that we've got is a whole kind of program for what we call student leadership. And it starts with some of the things that Kath was talking about. So understanding yourself and thinking about your own learning, what you can do for yourself as almost like as a role model. And then leading into things like bystander intervention and other ways in which you can help others. And part of then making a pledge for what we call a welcome ambassador. So that's just anyone who's made this pledge, is to share a challenge that you have faced and how you've overcome it as, you know, as a student, any kind of challenge. And so it's kind of, instead of peer supporters being the ones who are all sorted, who've got everything, you know, they're okay and they're ready to help the people who are struggling. It's showing that everyone faces challenges, everyone's had doubts about themselves, things that they found hard, felt lonely, felt isolated, etc. And lots of different things, and they've come up with lots of different ways of overcoming those challenges. And just by sharing those challenges, they are helping, I believe, that idea of that sort of imposter syndrome, and also the stereotype threat where people feel like they're coming in with the idea that they don't belong, and every time they feel as if they kind of can't manage or things are hard, instead of experiencing that as part of the experience and something that all students experience, they think, oh, it's because I've got something wrong with me. And, you know, that's that basic imposter syndrome, isn't it? That it's all, you know, the deficit's all there inside. I can't let it show. I can't ask for help because that will prove I'm not good enough, all those kinds of things. And by having students themselves sharing specific examples, you know, not just sort of the same old thing of, oh, just join lots of societies or whatever. It's, I experienced this is how I felt, and this is what I did. So that's one way that people can help. I think it does also help to explain more about imposter syndrome, but more helpful isn't sort of giving a particular name, or sort of, that people have to diagnose themselves as having imposter syndrome, but rather just that they kind of hear from fellow students and it becomes normalized.
I absolutely agree. Like normalizing the conversation that actually a lot of us feel like we don't belong here. And it's interesting. I'll have individual conversations with students who are saying the same thing. I'm like, I feel like I'm the only one. And I'm like, you're literally not the only one. And so opening up the conversation. And I think sometimes through like structured kind of peer support where students are trained to like be sharing, but also in like in informal ways. And there's lots of opportunities digitally for students to share their experiences. And I know in the social media space, lots of students say, oh, it seems like all my friends are having an amazing time in their first year experience. And then I actually talk to them on the phone and they're having a terrible time. So it's like, how do we open up that conversation and use structures that we have and empower students to be a bit more honest about how it's going for them and how they've overcome it, so we can learn from each other. I think that's such an important point, Denise. Thank you so much for sharing that. So the next question I'm going to pass on to Kate. So this is a question from Amy Zeil, and it's about staff. So how do we get staff to buy into the idea of student mental health and emotion management? Kate, what do you think about that?
I think you might be surprised by the number of staff who are acutely aware of the emotions that their students go through. But then there are members of staff, often those who have sort of research demands on their time, where they're juggling their teaching role and research, that just kind of run out of time and energy to appear that they pay so much attention. I think that more than ever, departments are working more closely with student support, counselling, mental health services. Certainly at Imperial, quite a lot of the departments have a mental health advisor, and they meet with personal tutors and talk very closely with them about how to support students' mental health. So I think that the networks are growing and strengthening, and I think it's just a question of encouraging those, and possibly, I know at lots of universities, everyone who's an academic becomes a personal tutor, and in some universities the decision has been made just to give the role to those who show an interest, have a particular talent for supporting students. But I think it's quite important that everyone who's student facing and everyone who teaches students has a role working with individual students, because that's the way they learn from student stories, by talking to those individuals. So I think there's a number of different approaches that can be taken.
Yeah, I think there is sometimes a student will have a bad experience with one person and then they think no one cares. So it's like, how do you actually share that? Well, actually, a lot of people really do care about this. And I know that King's were doing a lot of training for personal tutors in particular, so they feel equipped to have those conversations, because they might care, but they might be uncomfortable to have the conversations, right? So there's a lot of work going on in that. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, we're doing the same. So I co-lead the personal tutoring training with the head of counselling and student mental health, and that's really excellent for putting mental well-being centre stage of those workshops. And really, staff want they want useful phrases. It's helpful if they have like the beginning of an opening for a conversation with students, because this isn't something that they necessarily feel confident at, but they do understand the student and the context that students learning in. So they're very well placed to support students if they have their confidence built in what to say. And I think sometimes they feel worried they'll say the wrong thing. So a piece of our advice is, it's very difficult to do harm by showing you're interested in that student's well-being. So please don't worry about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hear the same thing from students. They feel like they're going to say the wrong thing in supporting, a peer. And it's like, actually just listening is very powerful, right? You don't need to have the right words. You just need to listen. Denise, did you want to come in on this as well?
Yeah, I wanted to absolutely back that up that Kate's just been saying. And also one of the things that, is a really growing part of what I'm doing, leading the student wellbeing service here at Portsmouth, is in having my staff supporting the staff who are supporting the students, and making sure that when staff, and fellow students for that matter, but focusing on staff, when staff have asked that question or noticed something where they are concerned, that instead of feeling like if they open up their conversation somehow they're going to be left with the responsibility, or that they've got to kind of know what the right thing is to do, that they can come to us, talk about it, tell us. We're collating information, so we might actually have had someone else raise concern about someone and so on, and we will take responsibility for acting to support the student and back up the staff member about what they've done or said, what else they could do, and then that sort of sense of, okay, it's not just with me anymore. So very much kind of reflective practice with staff as well, and trying to do that in a more proactive way with course teams is one of the things I'm building on. But I think it's absolutely essential. There was a thing in the chat about how many staff is under so much pressure. I know some of them just feel overwhelmed by the idea that they need to also kind of make time for all these lengthy conversations about how students are. They want to, as Kate was saying, and they feel empathic, but they are also really stretched and really overwhelmed themselves. And I think there need to be the structures in universities that it's a network of support. It's not individualized kind of relationships.
Yeah, definitely. So there's something around reflection for staff. I think that'd be useful for students too, a bit more reflective practice, but also a really clear like signposting and mechanism in place, and being able to raise things is really important for that. So I have another question. This is from Celine Brooks Smith, and this is a question for you, Tony, specifically. So Tony, it's interesting that you said you weren't favorable of mental health literacy focusing on knowledge around conditions or diagnoses. The mental health literacy scale has a number of questions on this. Is there a measure that captures the attitudes, skills, and awareness around mental health literacy more closely without the knowledge of disorders component?
I don't think, this is one of the things I don't really like about the concept. People have come up with measures like that, which I don't think are really what it's about. You want to know what behaviours people are doing. As far as sort of like psychiatric labelling is concerned, my view is that it's useful if it guides action in some way, and if it doesn't, it isn't. Like, for example, like with anxiety, it's just a continuum in the population. We all experience it. Some people, it gets to the stage where it disrupts their life. And, we know there's research showing that people can have this disruptive level of anxiety for years and they never get any help. We know there are effective treatments. And then when they conceptualize it, they say, oh, maybe I've got, social anxiety disorder. They conceptualize it. They get help fairly quickly. I think, well, if that's the case, that's good. But if that sort of label doesn't help you in any practical way, then it's not any use. To me, it's only a use because it gives you a sort of a schema for then saying, oh, these are types of actions you can take when you do that. But otherwise, I don't think it's of any great use at all. But I think that if you want to measure mental health action, there are ways to do that. I mean, like I've done it with mental health first aid skills, where you actually ask people about what things they've done. Like, did you come across a person who had this problem? Did you ask them about whether they were feeling suicidal? Did you listen to them without, judging them? And you can ask all those things. You can get assessments of the quality of their behaviour. Also, I've done it with things like parenting. But they know there are various things parents can do that can prevent mental health problems in their offspring, and we can ask them about various behaviours they've done in relation to their parents, or their parenting, and measure those things. So there's an article I've circulated. I think we need to move from mental health literacy to mental health action. It gives a number of examples of how you can measure changes in behaviour, useful behaviour to benefit your own mental health or those of others. I think that's the level we need to be measuring things.
Great. So it's not always maybe helpful for people themselves who are experiencing these to have all of the specific disorders, particularly.
No, I don't think it necessarily does. I think it is useful if people put a label on themselves. If they say, oh, maybe I'm clinically depressed or something, and then that gets them some help, and they then go and seek help, and that help, then it's useful. If they put the label on themselves and they feel bad about it and they don't do anything, then it's not useful to them.
Yeah.
I think, in Australian society, for many people, I think some labels are helpful. But other labels, I don't think labels like borderline personality disorder do anyone any good. They just stigmatise people. And I think there may be in some cultures where the labels don't help. But, you know, people do need to be able to recognise when, you know, things are getting their psychological state is getting to a stage where it's disrupting their life goals in a major way, and there are things that they need to do. And a label that conceptualises that to propel action, I think, is a useful thing, whatever that label may be.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Tony. We're going to move to maybe one, maybe two more questions, hopefully. Kath, I'm going to hand over the next question to you, and this is about kind of transition with social media. So this is a question from Chloe, and she kind of says, students feel social media often provides a very negative narrative about student life and how it can impact your mental health negatively. This can make students feel nervous as they transition into university life. Do you think there needs to be a more balanced view that I think kind of that social media could be helpful? What do you think about that, Kath?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it needs balance. There are some terrible things on social media. People posting very negative images, people bullying, all of that goes on. But there's an awful lot of positive stuff. Certainly, from my own daughter's experience, that her group of friends share support, you know, where to get help, how to recognise when you need to ask for help, how to look after yourself. So there's a very nurturing aspect to social media if it's used well. It's very great for promoting for signposting, for promoting different resources, and for just having the conversation. You know, I'm having a rubbish day today, anybody out there? And you can get an awful lot of positive response from that. I know I see that a lot on Twitter, you know, please, I'm feeling lonely, it's my birthday, I'm in isolation, can somebody say hi? And then they get loads of love coming from all over. So social media does have a really important part to play, but just with that caveat that, yeah, of course there is a negative aspect to it. You know, a lot of times, perhaps, I mean, I don't think young people use Facebook so much these days. It's all Instagram and stuff, isn't it? But posting these, oh, I had a great time. This is, look at me. You know, photoshopped images of people when they're going out and stuff. That kind of unrealistic expectation can have a really negative impact. But you have to take that with a pinch of salt. I mean, I'm certainly not going to post a picture of myself when I'm having a rubbish day, you know, up here on my duvet. I'm not going to do that. So it's about having a realistic understanding that when people are posting, it's not always the full picture. Yeah. But social media, I think, can be really, really supportive. And I see so many, and I don't know if I just follow supportive people. I see so much support out there for all issues. That is really, really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I think there, as I do have students kind of saying, yeah, I know it can be negative, but actually it's been really helpful in this particular way. And so I think creating a balanced view is really important. And also sort of with those struggles coming into university and that transition to university, how do you sort of normalize it, Kath? I'm going to ask you this question again, without adding to sort of the fear of students that they already have coming into university. So it's already, they're nervous about coming into university. You want to normalize that, but you don't want to add to the fear. Like, do you have any sort of tips for that?
Normalizing is a really good word, just to say everybody is going to find some difficulty somewhere. There's a lot of change. There's a lot of new things that you're going to have to do. The unknown is quite scary. So to expect, to be frightened, to be a bit anxious, but everybody else is as well. And if you can prepare and think, okay, so what's the worst thing that can happen today? Okay, if I get lost, well, okay, so I'll have my phone with a map on it, and I'll be able to find my way back. If I lose my keys, then I will message such and such a person and they will let me back into my accommodation. Preparation, as well as sort of normalising the fact that, yeah, we all feel nervous in new situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think having that be part of the conversation with coming to university and say, hey, there's going to be ups and downs, but students are kind of the leaders of saying that, right? And I think that's, from my perspective, why I believe in peer support so much. I think that that's so important in embedding in communities. Hey, there's ups and downs and we're here to support each other, and that's okay. So I think definitely. It's got to be normalized, definitely. And so, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I do think that preparation needs to start in the schools and colleges before people go to university. I think very much. And one interesting thing, because students are locked down at the minute. I work with someone who works at a college in Lancashire, and she says actually because people have had to be in their flats, they've made much better friends than they might have done before, because they're all stuck together. Whereas before, people might be on different courses and going out and meeting different things. That actually it has helped to develop community spirit a little bit better.
Yeah, and I've definitely heard students who've struggled with that as well. So it's kind of
Yeah,
can go both ways for sure. And I haven't
even
even asked any questions regarding COVID-19 because I think, well, I'm a little bit tired of talking about it. But anyways, that would be a whole other panel, I think. Yes, but there's been so many interesting questions that have come up, and I've not been able to even begin to scratch the surface of kind of exploring them with this amazing panel. But so please do stick around to go into the breakout rooms and have further discussion, because I think there's been lots of really interesting discussion that's come out through the panel as well as the chat. And I just appreciate everyone contributing so much in this space. This has been a really positive way to start this conference. So I'm going to ask one last question to each of the panel members. So the question is, what is the one action you would recommend people in the audience to take on leaving this session? So what's the one action you want for the audience to think about leaving this session? And I'll go through each of the panel members. So Tony, what do you think?
Well, in terms of mental health action, I think the big frontier area is talking openly about suicidal feelings. I think that's something that has a huge social taboo. People don't want to talk about their own feelings. They don't want to ask the question about others, about whether they're feeling suicidal. And I think it's very important that we talk about these things openly, because people can feel that by talking about suicide, they'll put the idea in somebody's head, they'll increase their risk. And the evidence is that's not the case. It's a relief for the person to talk about their feelings. And it is an opportunity then for other people to support them. So I think that's the big thing we need right now. One thing is to try and get social change in the acceptability of asking about the suicidal feelings and talking about them.
Great, thank you, Tony. And for everyone else here, all the attendees, please do share in the chat window your key takeaway message and implications kind of for what you might act on. So please do share that in the chat window while our panelists are sharing what the one action is they would recommend people in the audience take away. So I'm gonna hand over to Kate. Kate, what do you think is the one action you'd recommend?
I think for students, it's not to assume that your teaching staff aren't interested in talking to you about how you feel. And for staff, it's that they shouldn't be worried to ask about how students feel. And so similar to Tony, it's about having these conversations, not necessarily at the extreme end around suicide, but just around feelings for learning and how you're coping with being challenged in your learning.
Great, thank you, Kate. Denise, what do you think?
Map out your network of supportive connections in your own life. This is for everybody, not just students, and see it as a two-way street. You know, add in who the people you're there for and important to, and just see it, visualize it, and then strengthen those connections. Reach out, make the effort.
Great, thank you, Denise. And Kath, finally.
Yeah, I totally agree with what the others have said, especially about having a dialogue about suicidal feelings. But for me, what I would like the audience to take away is just to check in with themselves, how they're actually feeling. As this term comes to an end, I know a lot of people are rushing to get things finished, panicking about what they're going to be, where they're going to be in a week's time. I'm feeling very stressed, and I just want you to think, well, what do I need to do today to look after myself? What one thing do I not need to do? And just to really focus on their self-care. And self-care is a word that, you know, is a phrase that's used a lot, and it doesn't mean scented candles and baths necessarily. It can just mean eating properly, you know, or sitting down for half an hour rather than rushing to the next place. So just to really check in with themselves and work out what it is they need to do to look after themselves today.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. We as individuals are the people who do everything we care about. We can't do any of that unless we're looking after ourselves first. So a real message of listening, opening up conversations, and relying on your support network, knowing your support network, and then looking after yourself, I guess, are kind of our key takeaways to think about moving forward. So thank you so much to the panelists. This has been a great way to start #SmartandConf. out on Twitter, and really appreciate you being here. It's been great to chat, and we are going to now go into breakout rooms for you to discuss further and to meet others and just have a chat, and it's for about 30 minutes. So we hope that you'll participate in that, and thank you so much everyone for being here. It's been great to have you.